Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And this week we'll be reviewing the complete first series of Star Trek Discovery and then discussing how subtle should allusions to real-life politics be in sci-fi or fantasy. But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, this isn't entirely recent because I'm spending most of my recent consumption time still on The Boys and Battlestar Galactica, and I've already done those. But I also watched, a few weeks ago now, The End of the Fucking World, the Channel 4 series, which is now also on Netflix and seems to have found a slightly bigger audience there, based on the comic by Charles Forsman, which is basically about two teenagers going on a road trip, a sort of coming-of-age story where one of them is a sort of psychopath who wants to kill the other, and the other one is running away from her very, very weird dysfunctional family, and they're sort of in love, and it starts off as being fake and then sort of shifts over the series goes on. It's a very dark, quirky indie thing, I guess. It has a certain sensibility which you'll find quite familiar, but the actual edge of this one kid being a psychopath does sort of give it a bit more to it than just lots of quick cuts to things and a sort of knowing voiceover. It's quite fun, it's quite touching. I was surprised that by the time I watched all 8 episodes, I did actually feel quite a lot of emotion towards the kids, even though when it started I was a bit sort of, okay, this is quite arch, am I going to be entertained but not really actually care?
Oh, cool, sounds good. It seems to have got really good reviews, been well received.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good jokes, and it's also got, as I say, a very sort of sincere teenage intensity to it. But it's called The End of the Fucking World. The world does not actually end, shockingly, but I think weirdly that's still quite a nice title because it kind of captures the, oh my god, this is incredibly important, oh my god, this is so intense and meaningful feeling the whole thing has. It definitely, if there's one thing it does, it sort of nails that, and that's just kind of nice. I mean, it's comparatively short. It's only 8 to 20-minute episodes, so the whole series is about the length of a slightly overlong movie.
Right.
So it's fairly easy to just bolt down if you felt the need. It's quite good.
Yeah, it's definitely something I wanted to see. So you said it's found more of an audience on Netflix.
Yeah, I think I saw someone on Twitter saying I think it was aired in a slightly weird way on Channel 4 where they the UK Channel 4 where they aired 1 or 2 episodes and then chucked the rest to all 4 for people to find, which they apparently did not do. But I think based on the credits at the end, it's a Netflix co-production. So once the whole thing went up on Netflix, it's taken off a bit. I've even seen it's set in Britain, even though the original was set in America, and it seems to have actually taken off in America a bit, which is, or at least a few people, Americans in various groups I'm in, have actually said, oh, have you seen The End of the Fucking World? It's fucking great, which it is. It's
interesting because Channel 4 do these sort of adverts for the shows that are available on 4OD. End of the Fucking World is one they're plugging along with The State or Dairy Girls. So it's interesting if they weren't hugely supporters of it when it was on TV, but now are kind of basing a lot of their adverts around it. Maybe that's because they kind of want to take more ownership of it now that it's been successful.
Yeah, it does seem to have picked up a lot of buzz since it went on Netflix, so I can see why Channel 4 might want to throw up a few ads to remind people that we actually made that, We were involved. We helped.
Well, also, if you watch it on 4OD, then I guess you get Channel 4 can sell you ads, which they can't on Netflix.
Which, on the other hand, is kind of why I probably enjoyed watching it more on Netflix. It made the whole disposable poppy quickness of it much more tangible when I didn't have to pause for 5-minute adverts in the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is maybe not going to mean much to the few American listeners we may or may not have, but there was a period where this programme is made by Channel 4 actually had some clout with me, as this might be interesting or different brand. Nowadays, it's almost the opposite. They've lost me a bit as a brand. There
was certainly a time in the, early to mid-2000s maybe, where Channel 4 was kind of the edgier, more experimental TV producer. So yeah, BBC was kind of felt a bit safe, and Channel 4 was where you'd go if you'd get something that was, either it'd be something that's just full of sex and drugs for the sake of it, or you get something that actually might be a bit unusual, a bit sort of experimental, a bit trying something different. So they had a kind of, we go places the BBC won't go, both in terms of just having teenagers fucking on screen, or in terms think about one show in particular.
Yeah, I've seen Skins, yeah.
Yeah, but also a sense of we're gonna promote new talents. We're gonna tell sort of slightly more unusual, interesting stories that the BBC don't do for whatever reason because they feel they've got to play it safe.
Yeah, unfortunately, they've sort of lost that, and most people now go to Netflix for their interesting new television, and I think this has probably been mostly subsumed in the consciousness as a Netflix show.
Yeah, and most people go to Pornhub for their teenagers fucking.
And on that note, Alistair, what have you been watching in the last 2 weeks? Is it mostly Pornhub?
No. It is. Well, I've been trying to catch up with the Oscar films.
Oh, okay.
Which we talked about in the last episode, which regular listeners will remember.
If you're a regular listener, you don't remember the last episode, then you're failing at your job.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so I've been trying to get around the Oscar films, and the one I saw most recently is I, Tonya.
Ah, okay.
The film about Tonya Harding, who I get the feeling is like a much bigger personality in America than in Britain. I guess because she is American.
It's a name I know, but I couldn't tell you anything other than something to do with skating.
Yeah, I mean, I know her because of, I think, like, there's jokes about her in The Simpsons and Family Guy, which is how we seem to get most of the kind of American celebrity culture. But the film is really, really good. It stars Margot Robbie and Alison Janney. Alison Janney won Best Supporting Actress Oscar, which I think was one of the predictions we made last week.
Yeah, Alison Janney seemed like a bit of a lock for it. There was a combination of she was good at this film and she's been, arguably the Best Supporting Actress in quite a lot of films. So this is, if anything, almost a bit of a career Oscar for Alison Janney. Yeah,
it was unsurprising that she won, but I think it's not undeserving. She definitely did an amazing performance. She's really, really good in I, Tonya. Margot Robbie I thought was brilliant as well. It's a really good film. It's really sort of, the tension is sort of edge of your seat stuff. I found it completely captivating. It's definitely one of the best films I've seen so far this year. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Okay, because from the trailer I've seen a couple of times, I wasn't sure whether I should expect edge-of-your-seat tension or something akin to a sort of action comedy.
It's kind of a bit of both, really, in that it's a sort of black comedy. In that sense, it can be really funny at times, but it can also be really quite bleak. I mean, there's a sort of subplot in it about domestic violence and domestic abuse, and it's really well made as a film in that it has funny bits, but it never makes sort of jokes out of domestic violence or the abuse that the characters go through, which I think is really difficult to get that sort of tone right, in that it does have some really funny bits and some really dark bits, but it works really well together. Like, it doesn't cheapen the really sad or quite dark bits, but also like there are still some generally really funny bits. I mean, a lot like what we were saying about Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. The tone is judged really, really well. I think based on the interview Margot Robbie did on the Q Murder Mayo film review show, they said they interviewed quite a few directors before they settled on the director who ultimately made the film, because they really wanted to find someone who would get the tone right, which they did. And then obviously there's like, when she's sort of competing in the ice dancing, there is a real sense of like edge of your seat tension, or whether she's going to land the incredibly complicated jump she's been practicing. And so yeah, it's spot on in terms of tone and execution.
Yeah, that was probably the last remaining Oscar film that I did still kind of want to see. I will have to either get off my arse and get to it, or wait till it turns up on Netflix or Amazon or something.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really good. I think I preferred Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. That's probably my favourite film that I've seen so far this year.
Really? Did that take it over Shape of Water for you?
Yeah, I'd probably put Shape of Water third, and then like I, Tonya second. The thing is not that Shape of Water isn't good. We spent a lot of time praising in the last episode, and it is really, really good, but I think Shape of Water I sort of left feeling like, that was really sweet, that was really lovely, it's really well made. Whereas like I, Tonya, when I left, I'd had that real sense of like, wow, that was awesome. That was really good. It achieved that next level of really, really enjoying it that, I got from Three Billboards, or also got from like Dunkirk or Logan last year.
Okay, I should get round to that. Yeah, I probably enjoyed Three Billboards slightly more than Shape of Water as well, but I hadn't really seen enough of the films to award my personal Oscar. Although if we're talking about films this year, I also quite like Black Panther. Anyway, we'll get to this in December.
Yeah, that's the year is yet young. Although the Oscar season at the beginning of the year is kind of the time for like meaningful, portentous films, and I think it's been a very good year for the Oscars. I think there was a lot of strong films like I, Tonya, really good. Three Billboards, good. Shape of Water, very good. A lot of the stuff I've been seeing. Lady Bird as well, which I saw is also really, really good.
I saw that. That would be never I've discussed at the podcast in a sense. That was quite good. Quite slight maybe, but very good at doing its slight thing.
In some ways it's the opposite of I, Tonya, in that it's kind of about quite a normal family going through normal things. There isn't like, abuse or drug addiction, alcoholism. It's kind of, I don't know, more of a kitchen sink family drama. But that's not to say it isn't powerful or emotional. But like I, Tonya is kind of a different sort of story, but they're both good in their own way.
Okay, and for our main thing this fortnight, we're going to take another look at Star Trek Discovery, the first season. We, of course, already did cover this once, back in MFV 48, the episode entitled Dark and Gritty Fireman Sam. Sometimes I feel like I should actually have the episodes relate in some ways to what they're discussing rather than just pull out my favourite random phrase, but there we go. Anyway, we've already discussed the first few episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 1, and now we're going to look back at the whole thing. The whole ambitious storyline stretching across 15 episodes of Michael Burnham joining the Discovery after her mutiny and going through a whole experience to become truly one of the crew. And yeah, there'll probably be spoilers. I think to justify covering this twice, we're gonna, go spoiler on this. So it's been a few weeks since the last episode drops at this stage, so if you haven't seen all of Star Trek and you care, then I would recommend going and watching it before listening to this. And on that note, Alistair, what did you think of it?
Yeah, overall it gets the thumbs up. Yeah, I liked it. It was a good, entertaining Star Trek show. What was kind of good about this is the whole premise of the whole thing, or conceit, was that this is what Star Trek would be like as like a modern premium, in inverted commas, you can't see this because it's an audio medium, but I'm doing a premium, in inverted commas, TV show. They wanted to bring Star Trek, or at least Star Trek on TV, up to date for the 21st century, which I think they achieved. And it's just interesting to look at in comparison to previous Star Trek shows in that, the tone is darker, there's maybe more time spent on characterization, and it's like kind of entirely arc plot focused. There's very little episode by episode isolated stories. And in fact, I felt when they did something that was a bit more traditionally a sort of Star Trek episode by episode plot, they were some of the weaker episodes. Like there's one when they land on a planet and they have to get some crystal or something, and then it turns out the planet has some sort of strange sentient life that prevents them from leaving or prevents them from taking the crystal. And it was very much like, well, this is the sort of Star Trek episode you'd get in any other Star Trek series, and it's just a bit flat. Whereas when they went in with the big arc plot episodes and the big dark action set pieces, the show was really, really good. So I think, they've successfully made a premium version of Star Trek.
Considering we spent most of our last segment talking about how, slow and adult and morally ambiguous the show was compared to classic Trek, I thought it was weird that it sort of seemed to sort of slowly swing back the other way as it went along. Like, I'm not the person to tell you how much it has snapped back to the Star Trek formula, based on what you just said, not very much, I guess. I'm aware the mirror universe thing is a thing from old Trek episodes, but it built it into its premise, and mostly it just felt faintly batshit. Like, it was, especially in the back half, the last 6 episodes that wrapped up the storyline, things just kept happening in a really, really quick, strange way. They just kept throwing things at you. And the impressive part is, it felt like the early episodes were building towards that in a way that felt kind of slow and consistent. Like there were hints about Lorca's eyes reacting strangely to light, which was meant part of the build towards revealing at the end. And again, I cannot stress how much this is a spoiler. Last chance to turn off. Okay, here we go then. The broad direction of him being a mirror universe doppelganger, which I assume was there from the start. I can't see how it could have not been. But it was just weird how the tone sort of shifted more and more to things that's happening faster and faster, and everything being more and more sort of melodramatic, and everyone just trusting each other and leaning on each other, and then having these big emotional conversations about betrayal. After the first few episodes, it looked like it was going to be a very sort of stiff, slow take on the Star Trek thing, where everyone kind of didn't trust each other and was a bit of a dick. Like, by the end of the first half, before it became clear that he was actually some kind of villain, they even seemed to be building a sort of genuine trusting relationship between Burnham and Lorca. Lorca, the captain, who ended up being a villain, which was weird considering, them had him go on to be a villain, and also their relationship was incredibly strained at the start.
Yeah.
The first few episodes were quite good, but also quite slow and dry. By the end, it was just rollercoaster weird. Things just kept happening. By the time they were pretending to be their own evil duplicates, wearing these ridiculous golden foil uniforms, and talking about how evil they were and how they wanted to crush the infidels or whatever, it was a bit sort of, okay, we're a bit out of the really slow, stodgy premium TV thing here, aren't we?
A lot of premium shows build to a kind of action-packed finale. If you kind of think about the last few episodes of like the first series of Jessica Jones or something like that, the stakes are quite high at that point, and there's quite a lot of action scenes that they do kind of really hit the accelerator with the evil alternative universe plot towards the end of Star Trek Discovery.
The entire, most of the back half of the season, though, it's 4 episodes long, and then there's 2 episodes of more Klingons.
Yeah, there's two episodes to wrap up kind of the Klingon war plot. When they get to the evil universe, there's a few episodes of them pretending to be the evil versions of themselves, and then the reveal of Captain Lorca also been an evil doppelganger, which I think they built up to that quite well. I mean, there were definitely some scenes of his character in the first half of the series when he would, suddenly switch and do something quite unpleasant or quite nasty, or, showed complete disregard for orders, which, there's a lot of things in Star Trek and in lots of sci-fi shows when, the captain disobeys his orders to do the right thing in the end. But with Lorca, there was always a sense of this man really is a bit of a maverick, even to the point when, he's even more sort of disrespectful of authority than the usual protagonist in a sci-fi TV show. So I think there was always a darker edge to Lorca, which kind of worked with the tone of the show, which kind of meant that when he was revealed that actually, he was a villain from the evil doppelganger universe, it was believable.
Yeah, it was interesting. Even when the pace picked up a bit beyond the sort of slow, stodgy premium TV thing, there was always still this definite layer of violence and swearing and so on. I'm pretty sure someone said shit in the last episode, gasp. Yeah. And also lots of messy surgery scenes on flashbacks to the Klingon subplot. So yeah, they clearly decided that they were going to have their mature violence still. Yeah. There were some quite unpleasant torture scenes and things like that, yeah. Michelle Yeoh played Evil really, really well, which again shows how talented she is as an actress, in that when she first appears right in the first episode of Star Trek Discovery, when she's Michael Burnham's mentor and she's warm and encouraging and, everything you'd want a sort of parental figure to be. And then when they get to the Evil version, she's basically the exact opposite. And you can really see the Michael Burnham character feeling torn between this is my mentor, the person who I loved, and now they're evil and want to murder people at the drop of a hat. Yeah, but Sonika Marston Green playing Michael Burnham did a good job of selling her serious angst about that, which is impressive because it's ridiculous. And yeah. Again, the sheer melodrama of just the mirror universe stuff and everyone just being painfully evil just made me laugh. I mean, from the start of the show, they've had this direction of them powering the ship off magic mushrooms.
There's that as well, yeah.
Magic mushrooms, yes. Which felt like, in some ways, a slightly strange out-of-place item in the midst of the otherwise kind of restrained, thoughtful space drama. But by the end, it's sort of par for the course. We've had a whole episode where one of the characters wanders around in a hallucinogenic mushroom maze, and that just seemed like, just another week in Star Trek Discovery. Yeah. And, part of me wonders where they really go from this. I don't quite know what the next stage of this is. I guess they're going to have to dial it back a bit and build back up again. But, yeah, I quite enjoyed where they ended up. Yeah, the bit with the guy wandering around in the sort of, psychedelic mushroom dream did strike me as maybe a bit closer to some of the old Star Trek, in that it's similar to what may happen in a previous episode when they have a holodeck malfunction or a transporter malfunction. There's a kind of a bit of introspection done through a kind of elaborate sci-fi metaphor. It's what your sort of more typical Star Trek or TV science fiction show. But also, it worked well. The magic mushroom teleporting spaceship was an interesting addition to the Star Trek universe. I think that is one bit that hasn't been so well received by the sort of the fan community, I think, because it does kind of trample all over sort of the point of Star Trek, which is that there's spaceships sort of flying out onto the edge, and if you can go anywhere at any point on magic mushrooms, that does sort of defeat the point of kind of the whole pushing back the boundaries of exploration through going there physically thing. But I guess they're going to find some way to elaborately write the mushroom thing out of the continuum at some point. I don't know. I do quite like it, if only because, without the magic mushrooms, it's almost kind of hard to describe what the point of it is. I mean, I guess, even with the magic mushrooms, it's, Star Trek, but with magic mushrooms is not a premise of a show by itself. But I quite like the fact that it gives it this slightly off-kilter feeling compared to other Star Treks. I mean, I'm doing this to talk about other Star Treks like I've seen them. I mean, I was curious whether the hallucinogenic mushroom episode is the sort of thing you get in regular Star Trek. I guess what you just said it is, so fair enough. Well, not necessarily in a sort of straight-up way, but it's the sense that, I don't know, I've seen quite a lot of Star Trek in my life. I mean, I certainly have friends who are much more into Star Trek. Yeah. But I've seen probably all of the previous shows that have existed. So it was a big part of my teenage years, especially Voyager and Deep Space Nine that used to be on Sky One a lot about the time I'd get home from school. So in terms of the magic mushroom one, I'm not saying it's exactly what you'd have seen before, but I kind of felt there was an element that the kind of way they use the sort of sci-fi concept to dig into one character by taking them to the sort of different visual place. It reminds me of, sometimes what they do when they have the holodeck malfunction episodes, which was a staple of
I think Next Generation and Voyager. You know, it just kind of felt a bit more, it's just sort of tonally Star Trek, or what you'd expect from like a sci-fi TV show, not in like a bad way, in that this is kind of like how they normally tell their stories, whereas like the action finales with, you know, the big two-parter battle on the evil Michelle Yeoh's mothership, or even the two-part finale on the Klingon homeworld, it felt much more like something newer, like something you might see in Battlestar Galactica or other, again, quote-unquote premium shows. That felt something like they're taking Star Trek in a new direction. In fact, during the big sort of battle on the evil Emperor's mothership, there was some times when I felt like I had to remind myself that this is Star Trek. This isn't like Star Wars or some other adventure TV show. This is much more action, much more fighting than what I'm expecting. So yeah,
I was going to say it didn't really say Battlestar Galactica to me, because I'm watching that now, and that's a lot more subdued. There's no fun in Battlestar Galactica. If in many ways there's no fun is part of the premise, whereas this is quite good fun. In terms of ridiculous concepts, I also quite enjoyed the Tyler Vok storyline. The storyline, again, we're doing spoilers, so whatever. The storyline where one of the Starfleet lieutenants, the handsome Ash Tyler, has revealed that he's sharing a body with a Klingon called Vok due to a surgical procedure that sounds so ridiculous that it taxed my ability to suspend disbelief even in Star Trek. It's like, what? You shoved one inside the other? By cutting his bones open? Whose bones went inside who?
Yeah, it was
I mean, you could have just told me you shoved Vok up his bum and it would have made more sense than this. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it was a bit odd, that.
It was hilarious. It felt like they'd almost reached like Doctor Who levels of science fantasy. It's just like, look, they're both in the same body. They just are. They did a thing and now they're both in the thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Again, I felt the show had reached such a hyped up level of, look, this is just happening and it's just silly, but I was ready to accept the melodrama of it just so they could have Burnham's tortured relationship with her half-human, half-Klingon lover who was angst-ridden about his past. It was all very, in a way, it was a bit Buffy and Angel, actually. But I might just be thinking that because I've been listening to a lot of episodes of the Buffering the Vampire Slayer podcast lately. But yeah, it felt very okay. I do genuinely wonder if this is a season of Star Trek written by a few people who have watched a lot of recent Doctor Who. Stuff happens to fit the emotions.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. The Ash Tyler plotline, when Ash Tyler first appears in about the third or fourth episode, is when Lorca's captured by a Klingon and conveniently finds another captured Starfleet officer to help him escape. I was very much like, okay, there's a twist with this guy. It's not just, oh, Lorca's conveniently found a new friend. There's something going on. And I was expecting a twist, but I wasn't expecting it to go in the direction it went in. So I guess I should give the writers credit for surprising me, especially for surprising me when I was expecting something surprising to happen, and they still managed to surprise me, which I'm sort of laughing as I say this, but I do actually mean that sincerely, that was generally a twist I didn't see coming. It was quite ridiculous, and it was, I guess, it's one of those things when the ridiculousness is so justified by the fact that, yeah, it was really painful. Like, this hurt. It's like, well, I guess it would hurt, yeah.
That guy really is ridiculously hot and well put together for a man who's apparently been cut apart and put back together in a Frankenstein fashion.
Yeah, had his skin flayed off and things like that, yeah.
And then lovingly put back on and moisturised. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then given a trendy artistical shave. Anyway.
It's just also funny because he's it's the same actor as Clem Fandango in Toast of London. So it's just like, why are they flaying Clem Fandango? That's not...
I've never seen Toast of London, but I'm sure that's funny.
This is a night out in Shoreditch that's gone really wrong. But yeah, it was a good twist, and there was, you know, some emotional angst and things like that. I think the point you make that this is probably of the same school of writing as Russell T Davies's Doctor Who, in that the plot can fit the emotion for the characters, and the rest of it, the science and whatever can kind of just fall into place around it. I mean, I don't know, Star Trek, I guess, has a reputation for maybe paying a bit more attention to science. Again, I'm doing inverted commas on audio medium, so you can't see it. So yeah, and obviously a lot of stuff like the magic mushroom teleporting spaceship, or we'll just flay a Klingon and then he looks like a sexy human. It isn't exactly... maybe Star Trek's got a reputation for paying more attention to the science, but it's still a TV show, and it's still science fiction. The plot has to fit around the story you're telling. We're not, this isn't something written by like Isaac Asimov, which is supposed to, I don't know, pay more attention to the science. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but again, it's a TV show. We're here to be entertained, and we're here to be like emotionally engaged with these characters. And I think the science fiction or fantasy elements there should be used to kind of develop story, develop characters, to develop narratives, which is the way that they've been used.
Well, yeah, I think the story moves forward, especially, as I say, in the latter half of the season, at the right pace, that you can just look at these silly things and not think too hard, unless you're stupid enough to do a podcast about how silly they are.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, when you have to have these long conversations about it, you then sort of think, oh, hang on, they put the Klingon inside the man and not in a sex way? But yeah, that aside, yeah, I enjoyed it a lot while I was watching it, and I don't really mind that much, but it's clearly ridiculous if you spend some quality time thinking about it.
Yeah.
On the one hand, this show clearly loves its slightly stilted TV dialogue, and it never misses a chance for this sort of big melodramatic emotional moment. Like, it didn't feel like it was trying to do extremely subtle novelistic characterization. Like, she discovers her boyfriend is half Klingon, and then she is sad and angsty about it. There were a few moments of impressive emotional maturity where people just talk about things rather than, hiding them from each other for weeks, which I liked. Maybe I've just been watching too many CW shows, but I've decided to see that as something that happens. But the dialogue is very TV show, but it is a ridiculous TV show, so... Yeah, it's fine. It's kind of disappointing they made a point of setting up an evil version of the sort of the chirpy cadet Tilly character with the nickname Killy from the alternate universe, and didn't have her appear on screen though.
Yeah, that would have been good.
That was bullshit. But that's a minor complaint. So I could make myself believe that they're saving that for a future season.
Yeah. I also like the fact that the character Tilly, who's supposed to be the nice one, basically the one who likes Michael Burnham when everyone else hates her, and the one who just is generally like a good person and a bit shy and wants to do the right thing, and then they go to an alternative universe and she's a mass murderer who's nicknamed Captain Killy. And then she has to pretend to be said mass murderer and actually kind of weirdly gets into it and is actually quite good at being evil and authoritarian. So I quite like that as a plot thread. I would have liked to have seen evil doppelganger Tilly, but like you say, she might turn up in the next series.
I should be getting some new characters in the next series. It's a lot of them, especially a lot of the more sort of fun or ambivalent characters like Lorca and Tyler and fake Giorgio have been written out. So I assume we'll need some more ones. I know they're going to pick up their new captain. I
think the Michelle Yeoh character will be back because she survived at the end, but probably not, maybe not in a major one, as a sort of the villain who turns up once a series for their special episode, kind of like Baxter was in Babylon 5, or every show's got one of those. And I can imagine that Ash Tyler will be back again at some point because he survives. And I bet Lorca will be back in some form because he falls in, when he dies, his body falls into the mycelial network, or something, or some version of it, which is, I can imagine he's going to come back in some kind of fungus dream form or something like that. He's too good a character not to have back, and especially as they deliberately showed his body, falling into that, the kind of interdimensional travel thing. That's got to be deliberate.
Yeah. Plus, I'm not sure what's meant to have happened, if anything, to Prime Universe Lorca, the one from the same reality as everyone else. Does he exist? Is he dead?
I assume the evil Lorca had killed him, but I guess we'll find out.
Well, yeah. I'm not sure the Enterprise turning up at the end 100% works for me, but we'll have to see what they do with it. Didn't realise we were quite as close to the main timeline, to be honest.
I liked how they sort of slowly trailed it in the way that the bigger a Star Trek geek you were, the sooner you'd get that twist. Like, first you have the kind of the Enterprise's number appearing on screen. So if you recognise what the Enterprise's number is, you'll know it's that. And then you hear them say, we've got a message coming in from Captain Pike. And again, if you don't know what the Enterprise's serial number is, but you do remember that Captain Pike was the captain of the Enterprise before Kirk, then you'll get it at that point. And then if you haven't got it at that point, it'll just come flying into the middle of the screen and someone will say, look, it's the Enterprise. So I liked how they kind of tiered it based on your level of Star Trek fandom.
Yeah, I got it when they said Pike, because I remembered Pike from the first of the J.J. Abrams films.
Yeah.
Pike was quite old in that one, so I assume if they have him actually appeared, they'll just recast him.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like a separate timeline to the Abrams films, because, in that one, like, Vulcan's destroyed and things like that, so I think this is supposed to be a separate timeline. And I think this is supposed to be a separate timeline to the original thing, maybe? I don't know, it's getting complicated.
It's not something I choose to think about.
No.
I know they've got the Klingons from the films, but aside from that, it mostly seems to fit the original TV shows, but I haven't seen enough of them to really know. But yeah, whatever. I look forward to seeing what they do with it.
Yeah, it was good. And I'm definitely on board for a Series 2.
Yeah, especially as a not Star Trek fan, I was impressed how much I got into this. I was worried it would be, especially after a few of the early episodes, I was worried they were a bit too obsessed with being taken seriously, but I was pleasantly surprised of how little they seemed to worry about that towards the end.
They laid the groundwork in terms of like starting slow, building character, taking seriously, and at the end they decided like, okay, we've done our time as premium TV show, we're going to tell the story we're going to tell now, and the audience is either there for it at this point or they're not. In terms of balls to the wall writing, I do respect that.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm resident. Okay, so it's time for our question of the fortnight, and this fortnight, our question, possibly leaning into a few issues of the day, is How subtle should allusions to real-life politics in sci-fi or fantasy be? This was, I'll own it now, this is basically my question, kind of spinning off a conversation that me and Alistair had about it. Somewhat inspired by a line that Lorca says at one stage about how he wants to make the Empire glorious again or something. I'm sure you don't need my amazing analytical help to realise that is a reference to a certain current president and a certain terrible catchphrase he sometimes uses. And that did just get me thinking about how obviously I need to be, hit over the head with the fact we are making a political comment. Here is your direct allusion. Those sort of things always very briefly take me out of the show and make me think, yeah, okay, cool. I get it. I kind of got it already, but now I really get it. So yeah, that is a bit of a jarring, strangely memorable moment in the show for me. Alistair, what do you think of this whole situation?
Well, I've thought about it for a while, and the kind of conclusion that I've come to in terms of how subtle you should be is that it kind of depends on the point you're trying to make. Like, if you're too subtle, people may not get it. If you're too obvious, then as maybe that point when sort of Lorca literally paraphrases the president, then people are going to roll their eyes or just going to feel like, now you're lecturing me rather than entertaining me, and stop listening. It's difficult because, sometimes the parables can be so subtle people won't pick up on them. Like, a favourite one of mine is that the book of The Wizard of Oz, not so much the film, apparently is a massive metaphor for the economic conditions of the time.
Okay.
I think that goes over most people's heads, especially if you've only seen the film version. But the Scarecrow is supposed to represent the American farmers and the trouble they faced in the 19th century. The Tin Man represents the industrial workers and the American steel industry. The Cowardly Lion is supposed to be William Jennings Bryan, who was a politician.
They really didn't put that across when I saw the musical Wicked, I'll be honest.
No, exactly. So, I mean, it's possible that this was the kind of biting satire of the time. I think the author of the original book did write satire and cartoons and things like that. The point is, I think either time has moved on and the allegories don't see as potent as they once were, or it's just too subtle for most people to pick up on. So you've got to pitch it at the right level. I mean, if the argument you're trying to make is racism is bad, which I guess is the kind of the simple interpretation of the Terran Empire, in that they think all other alien species are like subservient to human and want to enslave them or kill them, and now everyone's united against them, then you don't have to be particularly subtle to make that point well. But if you wanted to create a fantasy or sci-fi story that explains what happened with the 2008 financial crash, well, you probably would have to be less subtle because it's quite complicated and it's not an easy one to tell.
I mean, the thing is, this is a show which, as I remarked briefly in the first section, it's not necessarily always working at levels of detailed, rich, novelistic dialogue and characterisation. I mean, I'm pretty sure both Supergirl and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which are both shows I watch, have invoked variations of Make America Great Again to communicate to us at some stage that the villains are bad. And, those shows are occasionally particularly guilty of some cheesy on-the-nose dialogue, and ultimately so is Star Trek Discovery, so maybe I'm just been slightly fooled by the premium TV trappings, and really that's about the level we're at here.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I don't know if just like kind of telegraphing Donald Trump is a way just to kind of, for a certain liberal viewer, is just a way to say these are the bad guys, you're supposed to hate them, or if there's a sense of people saying what's happening with Donald Trump is like exceptional, the way that he has these authoritarian tendencies, praises authoritarian rulers, dislikes criticism, the media, courts, all the balances of power, plays on people's racism and prejudice and hatred of each other. And, maybe there's a way that people are trying to say this is not cool and this is bad, and like whatever you may...
How subtle should allusions to politics in the Bottom of Fantasy Violence podcast be?
Well, when trying to explain a point, you have to be less subtle. But I think there's an element of like, maybe they're trying to make a point and trying to cut through that, whatever you think of political correctness or like politicians or whatever, they're trying to maybe shout at the TV viewers like, wake up, sheeple, this is bad. I mean, if the President of the United States policies...
It's a good point, actually.
If the President of the United States policies are in any way believable coming from the evil doppelganger from a murderous alternative universe where there's a kind of a intergalactic fascist empire, and if this character can spout dialogue that seems relatively believable also coming from the President of the United States, then we're probably, things are in a bad way, and this is the sort of thing you should make up and pay attention to. Like, are we at the point when, like, like the Mitch and the Webb sketch where people should be looking at their president and going, are we the bad guys?
I think we've gone past that a while back. I mean, the weird thing with Lorca, though, I mean, to go probably unhelpfully specifically into Star Trek, is that I wasn't sure he was unequivocally a bad guy, kind of until around the time they gave him that line. I was a bit sort of, okay, you've had him paraphrase Donald Trump. I assume assume I'm no longer meant to be rooting for him.
Yeah.
You know, he'd been a bit sort of ambiguous until then. Even after he was revealed to be a doppelganger, he's still, you know, a rebel against the evil emperor. He could have been, relatively speaking, the good guy.
Yeah, I always assume that you're supposed to interpret it that, like, he wants to overthrow the emperor, but he'd be another emperor who was just as bad, you know.
That is what I got once he'd done the Trump bit. But until then, I was a bit sort of, okay, so he's a doppelganger, but is he a baddie?
I guess they were going for moral ambiguity.
Well, they needed to until then to, you know, stop us thinking, oh, he's a baddie immediately, I guess. But yeah, that was, for me, it was rather than the baddie is saying a Trump thing, therefore Trump must be bad. It was like, oh, the guy who might have been a baddie has said a Trump thing, I guess he's definitely a baddie then.
Well, yeah, that's why, like I say, you know, and also maybe that's, I haven't seen the Supergirl Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. bits you were talking about, but maybe that's, again, it's the way that people are saying, well, you know, we know this is probably going to largely be a liberal audience watching this show, so we're going to use the kind of the iconography of Trump or whatever as a way to convey specifically to this audience, like, this is how you're supposed to feel about this character. It's maybe that's like the inverse. They're not trying to actually make a point about our world, they're trying to borrow for our world so they can communicate effectively with the audience and make them feel the way they're supposed to feel.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure that episode of Supergirl was actually called Nevertheless She Persisted, which is another direct allusion to real-life politics.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not accused of being subtle in Supergirl.
No.
Although it's not quite that hammer to the face in Star Trek Discovery. By the end of the season, they're not being that subtle there either.
No. But if they're trying to make the point that, like, Trump is bad and racism is bad and comparing him to an evil empire, I guess, I mean, like, the point will come across well. You know, I think that there is an element when, like, maybe it's best to be less subtle because it will avoid misunderstandings. There is a degree to which you create something, you release it into the world, and it's up to the audience to interpret it, and audiences will interpret it the way that they want, and you don't have much control over that. And there's a kind of a process that meanings will evolve and things like that. You know, if anyone wants to look into the bizarre and interesting history of the Pepe the Frog meme, the guy who created that didn't intend for it to be a hate icon, and the Southern Poverty Law Center I think now recognizes it as a hate icon, so it is a hate icon. But the guy created something, released it to the world, and the world did something to it, and there's all sorts of ways that other symbols become proxies for political beliefs and stuff. So there is a degree to which you create something, release it into the world. The world will do with it what it likes, and you have not as much control over that. But I guess that if you make something less subtle, that does reduce the chance of it being either misinterpreted, appropriated, or used in the wrong way, or just plain misunderstood. Like, I was talking to someone who will remain anonymous. I was talking about Black Mirror to them. You know, the second episode ever of Black Mirror, the one when everyone's like in a power station, you know, pedaling on bikes and then forced to watch reality TV. And I was saying, you know, I felt the message of this episode is a little bit classist and simplistic. It's like, you know, the idiots with their stupid jobs and they just want to watch reality TV. They should be like, you know, reading Marx and Gramsci and educating themselves. And the person I was talking to said, yeah, I didn't like that episode because I felt it was really anti people who do exercise. And I was a bit like, what? It was like, yeah, it was kind of saying all the people doing all the exercise is like, they're stupid, and like, I don't like things that say people who do lots of exercise is stupid. I was like, well, I'm not saying that's not an invalid interpretation of the story, because all interpretations, I guess, are valid, because you've released something into the world and the audience can do what you want. But I guess that is...
But that one seems a bit weird.
That seems a bit left field, but... like I say, you release something into the world, you create something, you release it, the audience does what they want with it. You have no control over that. You can be less subtle if that's the only tool you really have.
I suspect we are teetering on the edge of something I think we've skirted around before, the actual ongoing culture war of, we don't want politics, no entertainment, from angry men on the internet.
Yeah.
Whereas we are merely sarcastic, occasionally exasperated men on the internet, I don't know. But yeah, the fact that if you hammer down any specific political point to the stage where it's just goodies and baddies, then ultimately pretty much anyone can come along and go, well, we're clearly the goodies, even if, you know, you're the people saying, we don't want any women in our fiction, or whatever less simplistic version of that they have, and the writer probably thinks you're the baddies, and probably even maybe thought he was communicating that in his writing, but just filed off the edges to the point where you can't really tell. I mean, in a similar-ish example, although a bit broader, I've seen frustration over the last 5-ish years in some corners of the internet comments verse with the X-Men using its mutant allegory to talk about prejudice, but because of the way the X-Men's mutations work, it can talk about prejudice without ever having to show that many characters who aren't white, straight, cisgender, etc.
Yeah.
You know, the horrible prejudice torture struggle of a bunch of white, straight, good-looking people, a few of whom have, like, obvious massive physical deformities, but those don't tend to be the ones who are the heroes for some reason. The heroes tend to, for the most part, be, again, the nice, white, good-looking ones, and Storm.
Yeah, I mean, I've read criticism of Harry Potter that wasn't too different. I mean, don't get me wrong, Harry Potter's a good story and it's got a great message at its core, but there is an element of, like, they use the prejudice that the Death Eaters have for, like, the other non-human creatures as a metaphor for, you know, fascism or racism, but the Harry Potter universe isn't that diverse in terms of the human characters. I mean, like, almost all the main characters are, like, white and straight and stuff. Obviously, there are some who aren't. And I think the films maybe try to address that a bit more, but there is an element of, again, like, it makes it easier maybe to ignore the message you're trying to make. I mean, maybe with X-Men, like, people can ignore the message or the relevancy of X-Men to this current place in time in politics, if the fact that this kind of sci-fi allegory is being used allows them to compartmentalize the message off in their head as, this is fiction, therefore not related to reality, therefore I can ignore the message of it.
Well, you could just transpose the message of it. Like, I think a lot of the people who are angry about, entertainment should wave its politics in my face, probably see themselves as the plucky resistance fighters against the evil liberal media empire, you know.
Yeah, everyone thinks they're the Rebel Alliance.
Yeah, everyone thinks they're the Rebel Alliance, even though I suspect the writers of most of the Rebel Alliances would probably go, well, no, we're actually not you. We don't like you.
Yeah.
But again, you release it into the world and you're kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, that's how, like, Trump can be the president and can still scream about, like, the liberal establishment and things like that. I mean, again, like, everyone thinks they're the kind of the plucky underdog. But also there's an element of, people will do whatever they want with it. Like, as the book and I think the film Jarhead makes the point that even the most sort of, like, gratuitously, unsubtly anti-war film that has ever been created, someone somewhere thinks that's a celebration of war. In the film Jarhead, there's a good scene when they're watching Apocalypse Now, and it's the scene when the Hueys are attacking a Vietnamese village, and they're kind of, all the Jarheads are just cheering on the Americans as they kind of gun down civilians, and basically, you know, whilst they also ride into the, they fly into the Ride of the Valkyries, and, you know, it's a very unsubtle scene that basically, like, yeah, the Americans are bad and what they're doing is bad, but, like, people will still be kind of like, yeah, go kill those civilians, yeah. Is still an interpretation that is valid to some people. Again, yeah, you've released something into the world, it's up to them to do what they want with it.
Yeah, I mean, back on Star Trek Discovery for a second, I mean, I pretty much felt like I was getting the general, tolerance, racial purity, or obsessing over your own people to the exclusion of others. That belief was pretty much communicated when they put the people shouting, "Remain Klingon!" Well, Klingons, shouting, "Remain Klingon," at the start of the show. It's like, okay, I get the feeling that in itself is meant to carry an aura of America first, America first. You know, I felt like that was communicating a similar message, and, you know, in a way that had the levels of subtlety that gets, you know, a big tick from, say, me. But on the other hand, you know, maybe that, because it's being done by Klingons, a lot of people could just go, oh, they're the baddies. I don't have to read too much into that.
Now, it's a reoccurring sci-fi trope, and again, which is, one that's been used to explore politics, which is there's usually an alien race or group which basically part of their ideology is, like, extreme purity, and also this belief that their purity makes them stronger and therefore dominant of other. I mean, Star Trek is not the first or the last to use that. The Klingons work quite well, again, because they're villains. They're villains that are based on the idea of their own superiority, and purity is the root to superiority. Yeah, I guess I do sometimes wonder that, like, if it's something is too couched in sci-fi-ness, then people can just kind of happily ignore it as fiction. Like, for example, there's been people complaining on the internet that there's too much contemporary politics in, like, say, X-Men comics or in Captain America comics. And it's like, these are comics that were created to talk about civil rights and prejudice in America, or in Captain America, even less subtly, were created to be basically Nazis are bad and we should kick their asses because it was created during World War II. And now people are like, oh, I don't want Captain America to lecture me about how bad Nazis are. Is that because basically they're like, this is my entertainment, you know, I'm quite comfortable filing my entertainment as stuff I shouldn't pay attention to for my politics?
I don't know, I mean, the Nazis were at this point the best part of a century ago, I guess. It's almost as abstract a concept as the Klingons at this stage. Everyone knows the Nazis are baddies, but the reason they get annoyed,
you're in Charlottesville.
But everyone knows that the historical Nazis were most people know that the historical Nazis were baddies, but especially with the writers there to explain it on Twitter, it's become increasingly clear that when a lot of modern writers have Captain America say Nazis are bad, it's, you know, being allegorized pretty heavily with the modern day alt-right or the modern day angry internet people.
Yeah.
It's harder to ignore that. Maybe Twitter hasn't helped with this, I don't know, or has helped depending on what you're trying to get to.
Well, we have kind of divided ourselves as a culture into kind of two camps, the conservative one and the liberal one, broadly speaking. speaking, especially in America. And, there is an element when, if you're in the conservative camp, you may want to read X-Men comics, but you don't want X-Men comics to kind of have a go at the conservative camp. And even, in broad commas, even if you're not a member of the alt-right or a Nazi, that you do feel there's there's people from the liberal camp write X-Men comics, and I don't want them to kind of just use it just as a platform to piss on my half of society, is probably how a lot of people think about it. But then again, also things like X-Men or, comics, TV shows, Star Trek, these big things are some of the few things that do actually cross from both, from the liberal and conservative sections of society. Like the politics doesn't, music, art doesn't. We don't, in America, there's a thing called the Great Sort, where over the last sort of 30, 40 years, people have literally been moving closer to people who share their politics. People rarely see people who don't share their politics. But a few big things, like Star Trek, for example, does cross these camps. So it is actually a way to communicate across the filter bubbles and across the cultural divide, which is maybe, I can see why people want to take this opportunity to put across a message, and they want to put it across in an unsubtle way, maybe, just so the message can get through, such as racism is bad. Say what you want about your conservative half of society, but if you're really going to hold up the idea that racism is good, someone needs to tell you that that's wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just Star Trek Discovery's weird premium telly pretensions. Eventful always slightly blindsides you when it really nails itself to that in a really obvious way. Things like Supergirl. I mean, Supergirl is, for all that I find it gently entertaining, is clearly a show aimed at 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
Even more so than a lot of the other Flash Arrow stuff. And I can see the value of getting those beliefs across in the most waving it at you way when you're talking to an audience of 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you say, I think I said at the very beginning of this segment, before we wandered down the whole rabbit hole, I think a lot of it probably depends what TV show you're writing as to how much of a pass snotty internet critics like myself will give you about how subtle you should be with your massive obvious allusions. And Star Trek Discovery, because of its weird adults, not adults, premium, not premium thing, is in a bit of a weird place.
Yeah, I think also you can engage with things on different levels. I was thinking quite hard to come up with a good example for this, and I can't come up with a brilliant one, but there are some things when you can just engage it on a simple level, such as I think maybe the best one is Mad Max Fury Road, when you can engage it on the level that it's just entertaining and nice, nice movie to watch. You can also engage on the level that it has a simple message that, a society in which a few brutish men control all the women is just inherently wrong. But also I've read lots of stuff that really dig into kind of the layers of feminist and gender thought that's going on inside Mad Max Fury Road, and how kind of the way that the different types of masculinity are represented by different characters, the war boys. I don't necessarily want to get bogged down in the discussion of this film so much, but there are different ways you can engage with that film on different levels based on how much you really want to dig into the politics. So maybe that's a way you can be as subtle or as less subtle as you kind of want to be.
Oh yeah, I've seen people talk about that film as it was the most deep, interesting thing I've seen in years, and other people go, yeah, I didn't like it, it was just a big fight. So,
Or some people said they liked it, but they just liked it because it had good action scenes, but they didn't really engage with the politics. They liked, the fact that it didn't use much CGI, and the fact that they relied on actual, cars and actual stunt people jumping from car to car. And people felt that element of the film kind of made it just a bit refreshing and original as an action film, in that it wasn't just a big kind of pixelated wank off. It was a bit more grounded in reality. And loads of people engaged in that way, and they didn't really engage with the politics of it all. But then some people really, really engaged with the politics, but kind of the technical, how they did the stunts is very much well, take it or leave it. Which is, in any interpretation, is valid. That's, I guess, kind of the point, but there's different ways you can interpret it.
I mean, I guess Mad Max wasn't really aimed at kids in the same way, so I guess they could afford to be a bit more layer it through rather than feeling the need to really wave it at you.
Yeah, I think some of these segments we've done before, it is always you break down. Well, it depends on the story you want to tell, and it depends on does the metaphor serve the story and things like that. Whereas it is interesting how Trump has become a kind of a go-to sort of icon or shorthand for totalitarianism. Whereas maybe before they would have gone to 1984 and done something that was maybe a bit more Big Brother or something like that. But now it's Trump. Yeah. But it really depends on the story you want to tell, and the story you want to tell depends on your audience and the kind of points you want to make. So you could create something that's very, very subtle, as I'm sure The Wizard of Oz was back in its in its day, or you can create something that's less subtle depending on the point you're trying to make. There's that book, Guess Who's Back, about Hitler being resurrected in the 20th century.
Yeah.
There's a film of that, and they've just done an Italian remake with Mussolini instead, called I'm Back. They're just having a poke at the kind of current crop of right-wing Italian politicians who are kind of quite xenophobic and, comparing them to Mussolini. So again, it depends on your audience, it depends on the story, the level of subtlety you should go for.
Yeah, no, I can't really argue with that.
Cool.
Despite having been the one who brought up this conversation in the first place, once I'd thought about it for half an hour and written some notes, that's pretty much where I ended up as well. Resolution. Well done.
Cool, we agree.
And we managed to get through the whole segment without talking about the inevitable heat death of the world, so that's nice.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, please leave us a review as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content under the name Excessive Fantasy Violence, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you so wish, you could also follow us on social media, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence, I believe on both Facebook and Twitter. Follow us there and get the latest exciting updates on whether we're going to get our episodes out on time. We've been pretty good for a while, so you should be all right. And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me online at nickbryan.com, where if you go to comics.nickbryan.com, there is also a new superhero comic I put up, which has some lovely arts by Rafael Dantas, who's also worked on the Doctor Who comics, so you should definitely check that out. And I'm also at NickMB on Twitter, I just remembered to say.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we'll be reviewing the second series of Jessica Jones. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye. We, of course, already did cover this once, back in... Pause to open websites. Wait while website loads. Click on episodes link.
Elevator music.
No, it's not on page 1. Oh no, it is on page 1. Back in MFV 48,